And we're back with Richard Reviews. Today, of course, we are reviewing another book for richardreviews.com/GriffinChestnut here on YouTube. Today's piece that Richard will be reviewing for us is Richard's personal piece, a piece that he purchased in 2014. And this, of course, is The Directory of Knots, a step-by-step guide to tying knots. This is, of course, by John Shaw. This is an official piece by Richard. This is Richard's personal piece that he has here. This is a rare piece. You can't find this piece too often and in too many places. So Richard had to go through the high and mighty to utterly obtain this piece. A beautiful piece, a very respectable piece, and a very authentic piece. Just front and center, as you can tell, this piece, it's Richard's piece. He would just like to say it's very high up in his ratings. 2 thumbs up for this piece. A brilliant piece, and we're going to go into everything about this piece, the whole story, the climax, everything that John Shaw has to bring to us from this piece. Richard had his eyes on this piece for quite some time, and he was able to contract it through a private contractor known online as the alias Arn Johnson. Mr. Arn Johnson has no mouth, okay? And he lives in the upper territory of the Yukon Valley in Canada, who was able to smuggle down this piece and deliver it to Richard himself in 2014. Richard read this entire piece in 2014, and he thought it was absolutely amazing. A delectable postmodernism, existential crisis, a page-turner, which Richard was obviously accused of reading more than once. That's the interpretation that he got from it. It is printed in English, so in other words, if you don't speak English, you won't be able to read this. But if you do, definitely get your hands on it. A lot of the plot details, beat by beat, can be described by Richard now. Richard is here, and he's here to review it for us. The complete step-by-step guide to tying knots. This has been something that Richard had on his mind for a while. He grew up listening to Pink Floyd, so he did understand a little bit about, David Gilmour's vocal progression, along with Kenny Rogers and Kenny Waters and Roger Waters and pharmaceutical cultivation of the oxycodone epidemic that SparkNotes had. It sounded like just a long form of a torture fantasy. Periodically, the subtext and the ending in this piece, Richard thinks it makes it the story more actually a triumph of humanity. But nonetheless, Richard had a whole background for this, and he stayed ahead, and he thought that the story had a beautiful short story in the beginning, and it starts off in the middle as the action goes on, and then later Richard was given the details about the entire situation. For the sake of explaining analysis, Richard thinks that this video will not only give you full background information, but will also clear up a lot of misinterpreted unifications that people just don't normally understand with when it comes to meeting the team, and of course the classic Dante's Inferno. This was nonetheless barcoded in the explanation that makes more sense. As Richard said, matter of fact, the explanation that you're going to get for Richard, verbatim, comes the story of a Cold War, how the world and how it wanted to become a big war complex. This is Richard in its entirety. This piece was obviously created by computers, where John Shaw was able to cultivate, edit, and design the entire piece in its entirety. And the complex story that John Shaw gives us is enough to handle mainly the diabolical crackdown of the University of Michigan. This is a beautiful synapse of what is entailed in this piece. Richard thinks very highly of this piece, extremely highly. 10 out of 10, all the way up past the roof and through the clouds. This piece is unbelievably fantastic. Richard dreamt about this even after reading it. The climax, the characters, the story, everything from front to back, Richard is going to get into now, and we're going to talk about it. This is a hardcover, as you can tell. There is no bend. and it is a full piece. This is a full American piece, rarity, not easy to get, but we're going to get into it and talk about the whole complex plot, the characters, the ending, the surprises, the conclusion, and the interpretations from different languages. Okay, so as you can see, the Directory of Knots, Step-by-Step Guide to Tying Knots by John Shaw, the mastermind behind this delicate story. So before we get into it, let's just check out the condition. Now, it is a hardcover, as you can tell, but it's got really good flexibility. And it's got the spindle code, as you can tell. Spindle code. There's a spindle code. See? Alright. Even on this side, it's got the spindle code. You can see it on this side as well. Okay, beautiful. Okay, even these are page Frimlin. And Kremlin down with the page Frimlin is notorious about these shafts. And these shafts were obviously developed by the Chinese. And there's a little Russian Yankee in there as well. And on the side, you can see the Directory of Knots. It's an unstable, of course, of John Shaw, who linked himself. And he began feeding himself a lot of data until he was dead. So a beautiful piece by him. And you can download this entirety online as well. As you can tell, the complex nature about the master computer and the adaptive manipulator developed sentence, linked aggression, menace, of course, and finally, you are emerging intelligence. Beautifully done, fanatical, fantastic, and John Shaw, the man who caught the itch. This is the best piece you could buy on the subject. Now, as we go through here, we're going to get a full glimpse of everything and how the actual story gets brought into place, how he was able to develop a beautiful nature of a supercomputer version to go against the Russians. And this is the table of contents. Step-by-step guided material brings into a formidable notion of what exactly you need to do. And what gained some collective understanding was that these people in here were eerily able to recognize the networks of the honeycomb. And the honeycomb, of course, is what led itself to the system and the control and everything else that the main characters did in the story. In means of controlling the entire planet's resources, John Shaw shows that Richard completely understands the diabolical fortitude that people are alive and they drag them down. Very similar to George Orwell's 1984, his version of the Utopia versus Dystopia by Aldous Huxley and when Brave New World and of course Island. He goes on to this comparatively, talking about War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, of course another fanatical region such as to say Anna Karenina, The Idiot, Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, a lot of Kurt Vonnegut, some Charles Bukowski, other Japanese authors such as Yukio Mishima and Haruki Murakami. Very known, people that ultimately cried away from the Transformers version of being in a Shia LaBeouf movie, ultimately put a bad taste in their mouth, and it was cultivated in which sounds funny, but there can be a passionate anti-war Christ pushing it up, and it pushes it up and pushes it up, and there's a little torment there, but nonetheless, it's a beautiful piece. Richard doesn't want to give too much away, so we're going to end it there. We don't want to show too much, considering the fact that this piece really does shine more higher above everything else that is cultivated in this systematical world, where at first it was a graphic novel, then it was turned into a comic, and of course the comic faltered between a Japanese manga and American citizenship, which this ultimately became not only a film, but a step-by-step conglomerate essay uploaded by Richard himself. And you can click the link in the description that shows Richard's blog, and he uploaded his full review where he walks around this constantly tormenting with a watchful eye and there is no rhyme or reason to understand what exactly is being tortured, but the amusement in constructing a dead body to think that Richard's own friend was dead nonetheless shows that this piece is now, it adequates to a voodoo doll that shows a beautiful, responsibly, reasonably troubled explained to different 5-year-olds across the country. In about 900 years, people seemingly at random are brought inside and they cultivate this fanatical story that's representative of political, economical, and biological needs. This shows that when they're brought down here, despite their nationality and their political uprising, their economic values do shine accordingly. Characteristically through their character and personality development traits. If you go to Burger King and you chose the burger chicken sandwich versus the burger sandwich, you're going to get tied a 3-piece meal from the mainframe, which is completely of the free of will, regardless the fact that John Shaw shows that there is no free will and that everything around for months and years on end without food constantly feels the pains of hunger. This is, of course, goes against to the Indian and Malfunction Corporation of fasting throughout a 7-day period, which gives them things like worms or decomposing meat, which is just to say that once you eat meat and it falls through the sactum, the elemental tree that gives birth to the branches and rises through the sunset, is a story in which the rainfire dances across from Mr. John Shaw himself. Richard thinks this piece is astronomically above everything else he has read and reattaches it to his skin. This has been an official Richard review here on richardreviews.com. Today's piece that Richard reviewed for us was The Directory of Knots, a step-by-step guide to tying knots, of course by the Illuminati masterpiece man John Shaw. This is an official Richard review here on richardreview.com/griffinchestnut. Thank you.